This video is guaranteed to make you happy. And not just for the length of the video. We're talking about enduring joy. Because I want to cure you of climate change anxiety. I'll tell you my story, what I've learned, and why the world is not facing a disaster. Once you know this, you can cure your friends and family. No more climate fear, no more climate guilt. Now my story. I always lived a modest lifestyle. Hang up my laundry rather than use an electric dryer. Don't turn on the AC unless it's at least 85 degrees. Stuff like that. I was 45 years old when I bought my first car. Actually, my only car. It's now almost old enough to buy liquor. At first, I drove the car mostly to visit my father, who lived in the hospital for his last 2 years. It was pretty innocent. But whenever I'd gas up the car, I'd feel some guilt. As a global warming activist had brainwashed me into thinking that sometime in the future, maybe in 70 years, the world might be 2 or 3 degrees warmer, and that would be freaking nasty for a future generation of Africans. And it would be all my fault, all caused by the carbon dioxide coming from my econo box with every trip I took. And that was years before Greta Thunberg accused me of ruining her life.
You have stolen my dreams and my childhood.
Sheesh. Now it's worse. The activists aren't saying we'll warm a couple tenths of a degree per decade. They're saying the Earth is boiling right now, and we only have 7 years left until total destruction. Now I just laugh. For example, Justin Trudeau.
We're going to place a price on the pollution that causes climate change from coast to coast.
Saying carbon dioxide is pollution to justify a carbon tax. It's a guilt trip. Oh, you must be an evil scumbag if you like pollution. So the first key to freeing your soul is to understand that carbon dioxide is not pollution. In an earlier century, grade 6 students like me were taught photosynthesis. Plants grow by absorbing CO2 from the air. No CO2, no plants, no life on Earth. If you don't believe my wise old teacher, Mr. Abrams, go to CO2Science.org website. Click Do Plants Like More CO2? And check the plant growth database. Pick a letter. You get a list of plants tested. Now, CO2 in the air is about 400 parts per million. So here are the scientific studies where they add an extra 300 parts per million of CO2. Here are 600 more, and here are 900 more. For example, I'll zoom in on the red maple. There were 17 scientific studies showing an extra 300 parts per million increases growth by an average 94.8%, plus or minus 22.6%, proving that carbon taxes are very un-Canadian. The most studied crop was soybeans. In 108 studies, an extra 300 parts per million improved yields on average by 51%. And in 10 studies, an extra 600 parts per million added 93% to yields. Almost 100% of plants like extra CO2. So not only is CO2 not pollution, CO2 is not causing food shortages and starvation, like those guilt trippers want you to believe. Now when we breathe, we inhale oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide. So these morons who claim carbon dioxide is pollution are saying that they've polluted every time they've breathed. That's every minute since the day they were born. Everyone they've ever known and loved polluted with every breath. Wow, that's demented and anti-human. And their beloved cats and dogs, polluters. And you know who else breathes out carbon dioxide? Dolphins. Yeah, if you believe dolphins are polluting the planet, you are one sick, twisted. Now, key number 2, it's not your fault.
It was like that when I got here.
The climate activists want you to believe all this climate stuff is unprecedented. So it must be your carbon dioxide doing it. Ridiculous! Here's the leader of the Greenland ice core study explaining the temperature history.
And if we go back along this axis, it's going back in time. This is the last 8,000 years we have plotted here. On this axis we have the temperatures at the site in Greenland, and we can see that if we go back from now about 4,000 years ago, we would have temperatures up here for about 4,000 years that were 2.5 degrees warmer on average than today. Now as we approach our time, we can see that in the period between 4,000 years ago and back to the period 2,000 years ago, which is actually the Roman age, the temperatures have been decreasing in Greenland by 2.5 degrees. Then the temperatures increased gradually up to a maximum point around the medieval warm period, we call it 1,000 years ago. And then temperatures declined and goes down to a minimum around 1650 AD, comes back up a little in the 18th century, and then around 1875 we have the lowest point in the last 8,000 years, right here.
This matches historical records. I once visited Iceland. Our tour guide said there were no glaciers when the Vikings settled the country. Around this warm period, glaciers formed in the cooler centuries after. The Doomsters keep telling us that we will reach a disastrous tipping point if the planet warms 1.5 degrees Celsius from the 1850 level. But that was near when the Earth had the worst weather since the last ice age. And how would you know when the tipping point is when you say everything is unprecedented? The next key is knowing that your CO2 is not causing forest fires. The number of fires has actually dropped 75% since the 1930s, when CO2 was lower. And fires might have been even worse before then, but there were less reporting stations. The worst fires in U.S. history were the Great Miramichi Fire of 1825 and the Great Fire of 1910, each destroying 3 million acres. And the current number of fires could be reduced further by better forest management. Here is Trump in 2018 telling Newsom that California should be raking up dry timber to reduce fire risk like they do in Finland.
And they spend a lot of time on raking and cleaning and doing things, and they don't have any problem. And
key number 4, rejoice. Your car does not cause hurricanes. And the number of hurricanes has actually dropped despite rising levels of CO2 in the atmosphere. Same for tropical storms. Key 5, there are less tornadoes, not more. Recent tornadoes might have scarier stats because of increases in population or property values. But giving up your gas stove won't help. The worst tornado in U.S. history was the Tri-State tornado in 1925, when CO2 was low, not 2025. Key number 6, your plastic straw has nothing to do with floods. The worst flood in history was the Yangtze River flood in China in 1931. Had nothing to do with carbon. We should be grateful that our climate is so much better. In fact, the number of deaths from climate disasters is down over 90% in the last century, leading us to key number 7. There is an unprecedented number of people misusing the word unprecedented. No more disasters with key number 8. Rejoice, the polar bears are doing fine. Al Gore's convinced us that bears are doomed, if you believe his inconvenient movie. But it's fiction produced by Paramount, the same people who made Star Trek movies. Be happy. If you want fictional polar bears, look at this one. He's the King of England. This polar bear won the lottery. And my personal favorite, the same polar bear putting a chokehold on Al Gore. Now, there is a real video of an emaciated polar bear. National Geographic said he was thin because climate change ruined his food source. But no, that bear had cancer. What kind of a freak would exploit someone's cancer? They probably hate dolphins too. Zoologist Susan Crockford is the world's greatest expert on polar bears. She says their population has been rising for 50 years. She's written extensively on the topic. Gore's predictions were based on sea ice projections, which have been spectacularly wrong. And you know from the earlier section that the Earth has been warmer and polar bears survived. And the polar bears have been there for the last 150,000 years or longer. They weren't just there for the last ice age, they were there for the ice age before that one. And between those ice ages, it was warmer by about 8 degrees compared to today. At some point, there was no ice in the Arctic Ocean. The bears have always survived, sea ice or no sea ice. The only bad news is that Susan Crockford was terminated from the university. You can't get research grants to say, relax, everything's fine. Money comes when you say, there's a crisis, we need to study more. Like this report about oyster flatulence causing global warming. Do you think anyone's going to fund a study that says oyster farts are okay? Key number 9, the corals are healthy. It's the same issue as the polar bears. Dr. Peter Ridd became very unpopular when he questioned his colleagues' work on the Great Barrier Reef. Coral growth is at record levels, but the Doomsters claim it's threatened by increased carbon dioxide. This one's even dumber than the bear story, since coral evolved 500 million years ago, when CO2 levels were 15 times what they are now. The next key is psychological. The activists want you to think that if you don't believe their climate doom agenda, you're some kind of weird conspiracy theorist, all alone on the fringes of science and public opinion. So the key is knowing that you are not alone. Here is your dream team. The 2023 documentary Climate Change the Movie, The Cool Truth, interviews over a dozen scientists that dispute the climate catastrophe narrative. Physics and meteorology professors, geologists, astrophysicists. There's NYU professor Stephen Koonin, a former top Obama science advisor who wrote the bestseller Unsettled. Will Happer, a retired Princeton professor who was science advisor to 3 presidents, and John Clauser, 2022 Nobel Prize winner for physics. None of them are on the fringe. I'll post a link so you can watch the movie for free. I'll just give a spoiler here. A graph showing solar activity as the main factor in temperature trend. The corollary of "you are not alone" is the next key. Be happy. You're not on Team Greta.
I want you to panic. And I want you to panic. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day.
These people are depressing. You don't want to be on their side. How sick were her parents to let their young daughter publicly display her depression and inspire countless other children to have panic attacks? It's a death cult. Don't believe what they say.
People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
This is total BS. We've seen the death rate from climate disasters has dropped 90% during a period of ever-rising CO2. We know from CO2 Science that the extra CO2 is feeding the ecosystems. NASA can tell from outer space that the planet is greening. The bears are fine, the corals are fine. The only extinctions threatened are the ones caused by the climate zealots. Wind turbines killing great birds. Animal habitat destroyed by solar farms. Greta was the flag bearer of the climate apocalypse because any climate scientist would be fact-checked and ridiculed for making the same lies. That's why doomy predictions in the press are usually attributed to unnamed experts. You can't check their track record, and it won't hurt their reputation when the predictions fail. Your friends might argue with you. Yeah, but 97% of climate scientists believe CO2 is killing the planet. Really? Name one. They won't be able to answer. Occasionally the media quotes climate doomster Michael Mann, but won't mention there's a whole compilation published of climate scientists calling Mann's hockey stick temperature graph a complete fraud, and that Mann has lost libel suits, notably one against climate scientist Tim Ball. In 9 years of litigation, Mann presented no proof that he hadn't faked the data. The case was so bad, Mann was ordered to pay Ball's legal fees, $1 million. He never paid. No reputation for decency there. Yep, people trust Greta more. Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum wrote Stakeholder Capitalism to propose a new way to run the world because of climate change. And he quotes no climate science, no climate scientist, but he offers Greta Thunberg quotes from her high school years. These people are a joke. Key 12. That 97% story is bunk. I won't go into detail, but the Climate Discussion Nexus thoroughly busted in their video 97% myth. Or you can go to petitionproject.org to learn about the 31,000 US scientists who rejected the theory of catastrophic heating. See their research, and you can even download a copy. Remember key number 2, you are not alone. Lucky 13 is for unlucky predictions. The Doomsters are embarrassing. There are entire compilations about climate disaster predictions that never happened, like back in the 80s when they said we only had 10 years left to get to net zero. There are entire books debunking Al Gore, but I'll focus on just one of Al's predictions. Key 14, relax. Greenland is solid. Al Gore wants you to believe that Greenland is melting, and the water is going to raise sea levels and flood New York. Fear-mongering propaganda. In his inconvenient sequel, he shows melting in Greenland. Looks scary, but it melts in Greenland 6 weeks a year. The other 46 weeks, everything refreezes solid and the ice rebuilds, as it has for thousands of years. Gore also shows some icebergs calving. Now that's impressive. Oh no! Look at all that ice going into the ocean, filling up the sea. Global warming is melting the glacier. I used to fall for that trick, until someone explained. But think about it. If the glaciers were shrinking, they would be retreating away from the coasts, toward the interior. What's really happening is that the glacier is accumulating more mass throughout the year every time it snows or rain freezes. And that mass is so huge, it creates a force causing the whole thing to move slowly but surely. And the mass is so big that over several months, it pushes some of the ice over the edge. And it's not meltwater over the edges, it's solid icebergs, like the one that sank the Titanic in 1912. If there was no calving, that would be a sign of global warming. And don't worry about the Antarctic either. The landmass is always 30 degrees below freezing. If you had 5 degrees of warming, it would be 25 degrees below freezing, meaning still frozen solid. As it is, Antarctica has had some of the coldest temperatures on record recently. In 2006, in An Inconvenient Truth, Al Gore predicted a rapid 20-foot rise in sea levels. 19 years since then, we've had 2 inches. The sea level issue leads to the next key to cure climate change anxiety. Stop paying attention to mainstream media. Some background. Here's a chart from NASA on sea level rise predictions. Historical observations, they say sea level has risen 8 or 9 inches in the past 140 years. NASA has 3 scenarios. Best case, less than 1 meter rise by the year 2300. Worst case, less than 4 meters. Using the RCP 8.5 model, which has been wildly inaccurate in the past. And nobody predicted 5 meters. That's just there to make this graph look scarier. So here's the British daily The Guardian, predicting sea level rise of 20 feet. That's over 6 meters, which would put it here on the graph. Except that it could be 100 years. That's 179 years ahead of NASA's schedule. That would put it here on the chart. Except 20 feet is just a minimum. It could be 30 or more. And it's all but certain. The 30-foot level, I've got to redraw the graph so that I can fit it up here. The article doesn't even say who made the prediction or based on what. Now check this out. Global news coming out of Toronto. Sea level rise up to 20 meters. Not 20 feet, 20 meters. That's 3 times worse than The Guardian, which was literally off the chart. Yep, death cult. Global is in severe financial trouble. They might say anything for clicks, but The Guardian has had an editorial policy for years that the planet is collapsing now, and coverage should move people to take action following The Guardian's lead. For the purposes of our coming coverage, we will assume that the scientific consensus about man-made climate change and its likely effects is overwhelming. We will leave the skeptics and deniers to waste their time challenging the science. In other words, they're promising to bury all evidence to the contrary, like actual data about climate deaths or crop yields. And the claim about scientific consensus is a lie, as we saw in the sea level story, ignoring NASA's prediction in favor of something that looks like a complete fabrication. But it gets worse. Here they use the term climate change. Now, climate change isn't scary enough, so they need to call it climate emergency. And for the record, they say the bears are doomed. And documents show Bill Gates has given $319 million to media outlets to promote his global agenda, including $13 million to The Guardian, second only to NPR. NPR labels people as conspiracy theorists if they disagree with anything in NPR's climate agenda. There's also money to CNN, NBC, BBC, lots of European and African outlets, money for journalist centers, money for journalism schools, money for journalist associations, and money for media projects. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation is funded by the same guy who pushes the carbon tax. I haven't watched CBC TV since the Freedom Convoy. I'd spent enjoyable afternoons witnessing a diverse group of Canadians waving flags, listening to music and speeches, playing road hockey, bouncing castles for the kids, and then come home to watch CBC's coverage saying we were all misogynistic members of hate groups, possibly funded by Russia. Hey, check out the CBC stories I stumbled on while doing another video. First, people demonstrating for freedom, accused of pushing conspiracy theories in emails to senators. Next story, digital mercenaries using the same picture. And a third story, conspiracies about the World Economic Forum using the same picture. And none of these stories had anything to do with any of the people in the pictures. So don't expect any honest reporting on climate issues either at the CBC. You've done well to choose a video from an independent reporter. Give yourself some applause. And for me, the most important key to curing my climate change anxiety was realizing that the biggest climate change activists don't believe in climate change. Al Gore's house uses 21 times the energy of an average family. A private jet trip's are another story. Leonardo DiCaprio was famous for sailing super yachts, borrowed from his buddy the oil sheik. Justin Trudeau has the highest carbon footprint of any Canadian. Barack Obama lives at sea level in an estate powered by massive propane tanks. And then there's Bill Gates.
Yeah, I'd probably have one of the highest greenhouse gas footprints of anyone on the planet. My
kind of ironic.
personal flying alone is gigantic.
If carbon was as bad as they say, they'd all be accusing each other of crimes against humanity. So relax, rejoice, and share the joy in the comment section.